Peace, and welcome to another episode of the Quranic Remedies, where we spend about 20 minutes exploring a page from the Quran together and seeing how we can apply the verses to our lives. And hopefully, with God's permission, it helps us heal our brain, body, mind, and soul. Today we'll be reading from chapter 2, from verses 225 to 230. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge to God from the accursed devil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Gracious. لا يؤاخذكم الله باللغو في أيمانكم ولكن يؤاخذكم بما كسبت قلوبكم والله غفور حليم. God does not blame you for the nonsense in your oaths, but He blames you for what your hearts have heard. And God is forgiving and clement. للذين يؤولون من نسائهم تربصوا 4 أشهر فإن فاءوا فإن الله غفور رحيم. For those who abstain from their women is a waiting of 4 months. But if they go back, then indeed God is forgiving and merciful. وإن عزموا الطلاق فإن الله سميع عليم. And if they decide to divorce, then indeed God is hearing and omniscient. والمطلقات يتربصن بأنفسهن 3 قروء ولا يحل لهن أن يكتمن ما خلق الله في أرحامهن إن كن يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر وبغولتهن أحق بردهن في ذلك إن أرادوا إصلاحا ولهن مثل الذي عليهن بالمعروف وللرجال عليهن درجة والله عزيز حكيم. And the divorced women shall wait for themselves 3 menstrual periods, and it is not lawful for them to conceal what God has created in their wombs if they believe in God and the last day. And their husbands are more suitable to take them back concerning that if they desire reconciliation. And for them is the like of what is upon them in kindness, and for the men is a degree over women. And God is almighty and wise. الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيما حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به تلك حدود الله فلا تعتدوها ومن يتعد حدود الله فأولئك هم الظالمون. Divorce is 2 times, so either keep in kindness or let go in goodness. And it is not lawful for you to take something from what you have given them unless one fears that they will not establish the limits of God. And if you fear that they will not establish the limits of God, then there is no blame on them both concerning what she ransoms thereby. These are the limits of God, so do not trespass them. And whoever trespasses the limits of God, then they are those who are the transgressors. فإن طلقها فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره فإن طلقها فلا جناح عليهما إن يتراجعا إن ظنا أن يقيما حدود الله وتلك حدود الله يبينها لقوم يعلمون. But if he should divorce her, then she is not lawful for him afterwards until she marries a husband other than him. And if he divorce her, then there is no blame on them both to return to each other if they think they can establish the limits of God. And these are the limits of God which He clarifies to people who know. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God the Amazing said the truth. Now these verses start with something that is a very interesting verse that we need to always keep in our mind. God says that there is no blame in the nonsense that we say within our oaths to each other. Yes, the human being, we're very good at keeping our mouth running sometimes when we shouldn't. And sometimes in the moments of anger, we might say things that are from heart, like I swear to God, I will never talk to you again, or things of that nature, where it is a form of nonsense because in the moments of emotions, you might say things that you really didn't mean it from heart. That is just either in the moments of despair and in the moments of anger. But sometimes when you are angry, you do make oaths that are from your heart. And those oaths later in the Quran, God tells you how to take care of them or to go back from them if you made an error. Now, there are some times where we are saying things to people and we're taking them as an oath or we're taking them as a promise or a commitment to somebody. But again, it is in a form of just words rather than something that's coming from the heart. That's something that we usually do often, unfortunately. It's just because we are so used to taking some words for granted and some expressions for granted. But technically, if you just read them and you look at them literally, they are actually oaths. But God is showing you that he has his tolerance and he has the capability of understanding everything because he is the most understanding and he is the most clement. So he knows exactly what your heart is earning and he knows exactly what you mean when you mean something. And he knows sometimes when you're just saying things because you're saying things rather than meaning them or putting them to heart value. And of course, there are the people who are considered comedians that say a lot of things which they're not true, but they just want to have a comedic value or to make people laugh and entertain people. Imagine if God is going to take us for every single word that we said to face value and then to hold us accountable to that degree, then it would be a very difficult world because as I said, we love to talk often. And you can see us around now in this day and age. A lot of people are always trying to hold every word to, if someone who's sitting in a certain position, if they do say something of a joking nature or sometimes of just in the moment, as people say, in the moments of the emotions or in the moments of the conversation, you want to hold them to every word and every letter they said. Well, imagine if God was like that with you. It would be a very difficult day of judgment because we've all slipped in some words or we all slipped in certain expressions that we might not want it to be held against us on the day of judgment. And the verses carry on in talking about the divorce process. Now, the divorce process, as the Quran is, it's laid out to you in a form of guidance. I want to be very clear now. We are in a world or a society where when we do get married, there are some regulations where we have to tell the government that we're married. We have to register our marriage. We have to get from our society paperwork proving that me and so are technically married, right? And yes, earlier in the Islamic communities, there were courts to register your marriage or to oversee your marriage process, as well as the divorce process. And technically, there was somebody who was an arbiter to see if someone was worthy or capable of getting married, and at the same time to see if someone is capable of reconciling instead of marriage. These are all just concepts that us as societies have we put together to apply what God has showed us in the guidance of the Quran. Now, when it comes down to the divorce and marriage process, technically this is supposed to be a contract between you and your spouse in front of the eyes of God with witnesses looking into it. There is no actual need per the Quran for it to be registered in your government or your places of living and having all the legal procedures, legal as in the country's laws, procedures. But obviously this is highly recommended if you want to be part of the society. Now, there are countries where they don't allow you to have multiple wives, and there are countries where they have certain rules about divorce that is not applicable to what the Quran says. You shouldn't be following said rules. You shouldn't be applying said rules, but you just have to go along with the system into a point where you're still fulfilling what God has made legal for you and what God has outlined for you in your marriage and divorce processes. But at the same time, you would have to express it to the government in a way where you're still legal, but it's not part of what the government would allow. So in certain countries where you do have, say, 2 or 3 wives, you have a single wife by the eyes of the government, and then you can have 2 common law partners in the other residences that you have bought. That's usually sometimes how people approach the matter, but the marriage contract is still present because it is a contract that has been ordered by God. But the marriage process is something that we will be discussing a little later, or I believe we already discussed. Now, the divorce process in the Quran, it takes a little bit of a wise mind to realize that God is not recommending divorce. He understands that divorce is part of the process. He knows that human beings are going to have to get divorces because, as you can see, people are usually really tested in their religion when it comes to the closest people to them. To the people that they have close relationships, whether it's their parents, their children, their brothers and sisters, and their spouses and their kids. Well, I started with children. But those are the times when people tend to cross the limits of God and they forget the limits of God because of the constant face-to-face and the constant talking to each other and that relationship and the dynamics of the relationship. You can see a lot of people who are married end up put into a position where they cannot maintain the limits of God because just purely of the disdain between them, and sometimes it reaches to the levels of contempt because of certain events and certain things that have built up over time that people cannot reconcile in a peaceful way. But we all know those relationships where it ends up to be somewhat of a toxic relationship, where the person splits, they split, the two splits, and then they realize that it's very difficult for them to carry on without having the other person in their life. And there is a form of obsession where they end up coming back together. God is telling us that this cannot keep going on. There's people that would do it for years, years after years, where they would end up fighting, they would split up, and then they come back together. But God here is telling you that there is a form where you have to understand that the process, the divorce process, is you have to split and disengage for 40 days. Because within those for 4 months, I apologize, it was for 4 months. So you have to give a waiting period for 4 months, which is an extended period of time where the people can now reflect to see if they do really actually want to split. And when those 4 months are up, now the lady, the women, she has, and as soon as the 4 months is up, that is the end of the divorce if they don't come back. That is when the divorce is fulfilled. This is when that's it. Now, I personally believe that you have many times that you can go through the 40-day process if you've never reached the 40-day process, because people fight often. I'm not saying like weekly or monthly, but people every few years might end up going to a fight where it is becoming difficult to live with the person that you're married to. So that 40-day period is a very healthy way of reanalyzing yourself without the constant pressure of the person next to you and the constant pressure that like you have within your household. Because obviously you might need to have to go to your parents' household, you might have to go to a friend's household, you might go to your brothers and sisters' household within those 40 moments, 4 months period, is just so that you could see things from a different picture. Now, for the women, after they get divorced, there is a 3-month or a 3 menstrual period, which is there, I believe, is to purify the person, because it's not just about her being pregnant or not, because that's easily to find within the first period or 2 periods. But the 3 periods, I believe this is where the body is undergoing through a process where it's cleansing any like remains of the person that they used to be with. I think this is something that is very intriguing that the biologists and doctors should look into and know why God has decided that it's supposed to be 3 months. And then God says something that is very important, that the children they have the father has a right that the children should be raised in a nuclear family if you're capable of reconciling, just so for the kids to have something that is deemed the norm, where the child has a mother and a father, their biological mother and father, where they are getting along. And usually those households are providing the best type of environment for a child to grow up in a way that is extremely positive, and then it's easy to make them into God-fearing and God-conscious children. Now, in the chapter of Noah, God is giving you, or Noah says that these disbelievers, they just give birth to these like impulsive children that are very outside of the line of what's normal. So now when you have a believing couple, the chances of that child to become a believing child is much higher. It's just because they're put into an environment of such environment of a believing household. Now, when a split occurs and you can see that there is no nuclear family, the child has to suffer some psychological issues due to the fact that a mother is not always present or a father is not always present. So God is telling us here that if the lady is pregnant within these waiting time, like after where it shows within, it would show within the first 40 days, 4 months technically. And then, yes, so you would realize that if she is pregnant, she must tell the father. There are times when people are divorced, she gets pregnant, she hides the child, she never tells anybody, and the dad doesn't know until the child is 16. It's like, hey, I'm your son. And those situations, unfortunately, causes a lot of problems for both the father and for the child, where it is these unknown answers on why certain things were. So God is telling you that if you truly believe in God in the last day, it is very important for you to show and reveal what was put into your womb, and the fathers have a right over those children. Now, God is also telling us that in these relationships where there are children involved and you do have wives, the men have a degree over women. The degree here is not in a sense where you could oppress the women, or you can sit here and think that you're the most dominant in any of those natures. The degree here is in a sense of making decisions. So if I want to move countries, I have the discussion with my wife. At the end of the day, I'm the one who's really having the ability to decide which way we go. So it's like a 51% relationship with the wife. Because if it was all 50-50, then the decisions have to be always mutual with the person that's next to me. But I have a degree over women, just a single degree over my wife, for example. One, because of what I'm spending upon them, which is going to be discussed in chapter 4. But the other thing is, it's going to be very difficult for me as a person who's running my household, for me to have this goal on how I want to approach my Lord, on how I want to approach my Lord and my hereafter. If every decision that I've already decided has to be always put up for debate. Now, there are certain things that when the marriage is like being engaged, I have to understand my wife's goals in life, my wife's desires on what she would like to achieve for the hereafter. And those are things that should be considered in the plan going in and not later. Now, God is telling us that divorce is twice, right? There are limits of God, which I did express earlier, in a sense where people end up crossing the limits of God because of the anger, because of the constant issues, sometimes because of jealousy. There's a lot of dynamics when it comes down to these relationships where you can cross the limits of God. But God has made it very clear, which is, I believe, something that is always something that's taken away from the women and the rights that God has given them, where if you did give them a gift, if you did buy them a house, if you did go and share a way for you both to purchase a house where she used to live in, or you purchased a car and you both were paying for it, you believe that just because you had a divorce that you have a right over that car, or you have a right over that home. This is actually incorrect. Just because you paid half of it, it does not mean now you have a right over it, when God clearly states that whatever you've given them, you can't take it back. That 50% that you were putting in the house, or that 50% that you were putting in the car, it's not for you to have half of it. It's for her to have the car. It's for her to have a house. And it's not legal for you to take these possessions back or try to force her to give it to you, because it is her property. We do have to go back a little bit in time and realize that this is just recently where the women now want to join the workforce in the frequency and with the drive that they have in this modern day. I'm not saying that this is wrong, but it's just a different way of approaching life than it was for a very long time. Usually the wife was not as affluent as the man would be, because the men were concentrating on trade and building these empires, which, yes, some women did have their hands in trading and they did have their hands in empire building. But the majority of the women were actually just waiting for somebody to come take care of them, right? So when you aren't giving them property, when you aren't giving them money, it is not lawful. It's not good for you to take it back, because she is in a constant struggle compared to what you were given as opportunities. Just recently, in these last 100 years or 120 years, there have been a push for women to have it easier, for them not to concentrate on raising families, but for them to build wealth. And we could see the difference in the world when these opportunities are given. It's just because I believe they get abused, both by men and women. Now, the limits of God is something that's very important. If I've given her something where she gets tested by the limits of God, there are ways where she can get tested in regards to, for example, that you've given her something where she will remind her, it's a sentimental value, where she will start maybe feeling for you in a certain way. And then you guys might see each other after the divorce in a way that you shouldn't be feeling like seeing each other. Then she can give you back that gift if she feels like it. Or if you bought her a car and she feels like maybe in that car she would end up transgressing God's limits and meeting people she don't want to meet. I'm just giving some small examples. She can give back that car. But these are all based upon, one, her decision and the limits of God. Now, this process of divorce can happen twice. So we go through the 4 months of waiting, you go through the menstrual periods, but within the menstrual period, they can reconcile, because you've divorced her after 40 days, you guys can realize that, you know what, it was a mistake. I do miss the person a lot. I do feel like my life is not as fulfilling with them not being present in my life. And then you guys reconcile. And then a few years later, a few moments later, you guys end up having another issue where you are now 44 months apart. Within those 4 months, it passes by. You are now divorced again. You're no longer allowed to come back to them. So this is where those toxic relationships needs to be cut right then and there, because then you are just now causing sin for both of each other. Because in those moments of fighting and hitting each other, screaming at each other, those are the moments when you really are capable of transgressing against somebody. And it's somebody that's supposed to, you loved at one point, maybe you still love. Maybe out of those fights that you're having, you are causing a lot of transgressions with your words and a lot of transgressions in your actions, that it's best that you guys stay apart. I believe this is also true with your parents. If you are not capable of engaging your parents in a very good way, because they might put a certain pressure on you that you don't, yet you've grown up to respond in a certain way, that it's sometimes best to just talk to them nicely. And when they do answer you in ways that you don't appreciate it, you just disengage in a nice manner. And it's just because if you start to yell back at them or argue back at them, you might say some hurtful stuff, which God tells you this is absolutely a limit that you shouldn't be crossing. It's in the Quran that you have to talk to your parents nicely. And now finally, God is telling us that if those 2 times have passed, people have been divorced twice, she is no longer lawful for him in marriage, other than if she does go engage in a different relationship and they do get married, end up married, and then later they do divorce, then there is no harm for you to come and try again. It's just because at this point you could, the first point is, this does not give you now the right to play lawyer with God. It's just now you've divorced her twice and now you want to marry her. So you set it up so that she marries your brother and then divorces him right there. And then there you go. That means she was married and then she was divorced. That's not how it works, because God is judging the situation for exactly what's in and what's going on with people's hearts. It's not about playing a lawyer with God. It's understanding why God has said that she has to go get married. And if she does get married and then she gets divorced, then she's lawful for you. One, this is for her to see that maybe the relationship that you're in, because you see, it's not about you getting married. It's not about the man getting married. It's about her getting married. Maybe when she realizes that she marries somebody else, that you were the issue, that you were not the person that was very good for her and treating her correctly. And she might see a different way of approaching life that she might appreciate a lot. But she could also go to a different marriage and realize that maybe she was the issue in the first place, is because she's reaching the same issues with her new husband. But that does not necessitate for it to be true on both of the ends, because God is telling us that it is important, it is nice to have these companionships. And maybe you guys did split because one of you had to travel, one of you had to travel a few times, and the lady or the women felt lonely. So she went to a different relationship where she's capable of having that satisfaction that she's looking for in her world for her hereafter, because it is after the hereafter. Now, when you do come back, you have to also remember that the limits of God are still upon you. You still have a duty to not go back to transgressing each other, which is usually the majority reasons of why people get divorced. Now, when we look at the world in the way that it is today, unfortunately, it feels like a lot of people, when they do get a divorce, even if it's the first divorce, it's almost like a seal to their fate. How many times have you heard of people who are divorced, especially in certain regions in the world, when the girl gets divorced, that's it. She's now used product and no one else is going to marry her, which brings it back to that verse in 230, where it is very important to marry divorced women. It is very, very important to look for women that are either single mothers or they have been put to the side, because those women, one, they have experiences on how relationships and those things work, where someone who's new into it would not be capable of understanding these things. You see that if you are looking for marriage in this day and age, if you try to engage with men who are divorced, I'm talking to the ladies and the women here, if you're engaged in a conversation with someone who's divorced, you find them a lot more serious than the person that isn't, because they've been through it. They've understood what it took for the relationship to happen, and they understood what it took for it to break. So they know what to do to not go through those same things over and over again. Marrying somebody who is a non-virgin, it is not something that is a taboo or is incorrect. Society has made it into a taboo, and this is against what God has ordered, and it's against what God has shown us. You don't need to always sit there and look for what you believe is the best way or the best wife, which she has to be young and a virgin. Sometimes the best people are the ones who did go through a divorce, because they're more capable of helping you in your mission with God, because of the maturity, because of the experience, because of the history. And with that said, God does not recommend for us to get divorced. God doesn't recommend for us to cut our relationships, even with our parents, our children, our brothers and sisters. Yes, there are some times where we have to, especially if a person just falls off his religion, especially if a person decides to backstab you, to deceive you. Those are very difficult to reconcile, and it's sometimes the best way that you could maintain your composure in your religion is to separate from such people. But you shouldn't let these types of relationships pull you down into the moments of depression. Whatever rights you've been taken away from you by your spouses, by your parents, by your children, by your brothers and sisters, it will come back to you. So always trying to stay in the positive nature, always trying to positive mentality, always trying to keep relationships intact. This is one of our goals as a believer. And with that said, thank you very much. I will try to keep making these Quranic remedies. I will put a link for our Telegram group if you want to carry on the discussion, and peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.